Today our lesson is called The Faith of the Jews. And we talked about the Gentiles last week. We said faith for the Gentiles, because Peter had faith really to go to the Gentiles and to open the door for them. But today we're going to talk about the faith of the Jews, because that goes way back, doesn't it? Way, way, way back. You know, when we're talking about faith heroes, we have to, of course, mention Paul. And that could be a whole year study, because Paul just did so much. You know, his name was really Saul. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, so very likely he was named after King Saul, who was a Benjamite. And he was a tremendously devout Jew. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. He was a missionary, if you remember, and went primarily up to Asia Minor and then to the west. He went into Europe. Many people feel he went as far as Spain at one time. Certainly he finally got to Rome, and then he was released from prison for a little while and went on to Spain very possibly before he went back to Rome. But, you know, there's so much about him that we won't take time to go into in this particular series, but he wrote 13 epistles, 13 letters. He may have written Hebrews. We don't know about that for sure, but 13 for sure. And, you know, they were letters to the churches, letters to people like Titus and Timothy, and yet they are tremendously important when it comes to doctrinal understanding of what the Christian faith is all about. And yet, Paul never knew Jesus when he was walking on this earth, did he?
No.
Never knew him. Never even saw him, as far as we know. There's nothing said about that. But he met him, person face to face, didn't he, on the road to Damascus. Let's turn to Acts 22, and we have to start out with Paul, looking at him, and then how what happened with him, because he was the apostle to the Gentiles. No question about that, and yet he never forgot his own people. Acts 22, and we're going to start with verse 3. Paul is giving his testimony here. Now, he gives his testimony several times in the book of Acts, but this is one of the most complete, I think. And this was in Jerusalem shortly before he was taken to Rome. He had been arrested. You know, there had been a big riot in Jerusalem and all of that, and they arrested him, and they had to imprison him to keep him safe, because they were ready to just kill him right on the spot. And so he has an opportunity to speak. And whenever he had an opportunity to speak, he gave his testimony. You know, sometimes we think we need to give some kind of a big Bible study. Your testimony is what people really want to hear. How do you know Jesus? What happened to you? What makes you different? Why do you go to church and to Bible study? People are interested in that. So this is what he did. He said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus at Cilicia, but brought up in this city, that would be Jerusalem, at the feet of Gamaliel, educated according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, as you all are this day. I persecuted this way. Now see, in the beginning, the Christians were not called Christians. They were called the Way, or the followers of Jesus. They were still Jews. They were all Jews, weren't they, in the very beginning? So it was just a different way. It was almost like another denomination within the Jewish faith. And so he said, I persecuted this way, because he thought they were, way off, that they were, wrong. He said, I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women, as the high priest and the whole council of elders bear me witness. From them I received letters to the brethren, and I journeyed to Damascus to take those who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem to be punished. That was his main deal in the beginning, wasn't it? He was going to go get those followers of this Jesus and bring them back to Jerusalem, and they were going to be tried as derelicts and punished and whipped and maybe even killed and, get rid of them. Verse 6, as I made my journey and drew near to Damascus, about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone about me. And I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Now, if you have a red letter Bible, those are in red letters, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because those are the words of Jesus. Jesus himself appeared to Saul here, and he's speaking to him. He said, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not hear the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, what shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, rise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all that is appointed for you to do. Now, just seeing Jesus has made a difference, hasn't it? He didn't say to him, Jesus, what all do you believe? And what all did you come to do? And tell me all about you. He didn't do that at all. You know, all it takes is for us to see Jesus, to open our eyes and really see him, to meet him, to know that that's who it is. I mean, this encounter was so amazing to Paul that everything about him made a 180-degree turnaround. He was just like, whoa, I thought you were totally wrong, and now I know you are totally right. I mean, that's just about what happened, wasn't it? And then verse 11 says, and when I could not see because of the brightness of the light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me and came into Damascus. He's literally blinded. And he goes into Damascus as the big hero to catch these people, and now he's being led in, you know, by the people with him. And one Ananias, a devout man, according to the law, now this means that he was a good Jew, well spoken of by all the Jews who lived there, came to me, and standing by me said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. Now remember, Ananias had been prepared by God himself, hadn't he? That's in another part of the story earlier on. And in that very hour I received my sight and saw him, and he said, now this is Ananias, the Lord of our fathers appointed you to know his will, to see the just one, and to hear a voice from his mouth. For you will be witnesses for him to all men of what you have seen and heard. And now, why do you wait? Rise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on his name. Just like that. I mean, he's saved, right? He is literally saved. And so he says, just be baptized and, you know, you've had a conversion experience. Verse 17, and when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw him, this would be Jesus, saying to me, make haste and get quickly out of Jerusalem, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And I said, Lord, they themselves know that in every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believed in thee. And when the blood of Stephen, thy witness, was shed, I also was standing by and approving and keeping the garments of those who killed him. Because Saul was there. Stephen was the first martyr. And when they killed him, Saul was standing there holding their coats and definitely approving of what they were doing. And so he said, you know, they won't believe me. They won't believe that there's been a change in me. Verse 21, and he said to me, depart, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Now, Paul is a devout Jew. We know that because, you know, he was really standing up for the faith here, wasn't he? And now he's had such a turnaround, and God's call on his life is that he's to go to the Gentiles. It's interesting when we see this, that wherever he went, and Paul went all over, like I said, all over the western part of Europe, he always went to the Jews first. He always went to the synagogue or to a house that he knew about where there were Jewish people. Hopefully, you know, that they would become Jewish believers. But he always went to the Jews first. And then when, you know, they wouldn't receive, then of course he would find some people who would. And of course he was definitely to the Gentiles. And his books were really, his letters really were to the Gentile church. I'm going to take your questions afterwards. Okay, so it's important that we understand that he always had a heart for the Jews. And so then it says here that he was to go to the Gentiles, but we believe from what history tells us that he went to Arabia for quite a while, and that's where God really, really spoke to him. Jesus just appeared to him evidently, and because he would say in his letters, and I learned, or he said, or, this came into place. And Jesus himself taught Paul. He didn't follow him when he was on the earth, but Jesus taught him and taught him what he was to do. And so, he never, however, forgot the Jewish people. And of course, he writes about them in Romans 9, 10, and 11, which we're going to look at later. Well, who are the Jews? Who are these Jews? They have a 4,000-year history. There's no other people on the earth that can really date themselves probably back that far and have history and connections and all of that ever. And so for 4,000 years, there have been Jewish people, starting with Abraham. Now, Abraham didn't start out being a Jew. In fact, the name Jew didn't even come along for a long time. They were called Israelites in the beginning. But Abraham, you remember, was from the Chaldean. He was from over in what today would be Iraq, in that area. And he was probably an astrologer. Most of the people were. They looked at the stars and they figured out, they were pagans. But God spoke to Abraham, and Abraham heard him and followed, didn't he? Because he told Abraham to go to a country he was going to show him. Abraham had a revelation of Yahweh, a revelation of the one true God, and that was the mission of the Jews. The mission of the Jews was to let the world know that there was one God, not a whole lot of gods, not gods of the moon and the stars and the trees and all the other things that people were believing in. So he was a man who got that. God spoke to him. And he went to the land that God showed him, and we've talked about this before, that Israel was placed right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, right in the middle of the then known world. So that the trade routes that went from Asia to Africa, from Asia to Europe, all had to go through Israel. And so Israel was placed there. God placed those people there so that they could spread the message of the one true God everywhere that they went. Sometimes Israel's called the center of the earth. And there's a map, there's a wonderful old ancient map that shows Israel right in the middle of the then known world. Okay, so then we had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, these were the sons who went down. Jacob, of course, had 12 sons that began the 12 tribes. And then they were taken down into Egypt, weren't they? Down into Egypt where they were slaves for 400 years. Now, they weren't slaves for 400 years, but they were in Egypt for 400 years. And they were becoming a people. They were becoming a nation because, of course, they were multiplying and multiplying. In fact, when they left Egypt, many people think there were around 2 million. And now there were some other people that went with them, but, they had grown from 12 sons to, almost 2 million people. So they're taken out of Egypt now. And we know this whole story. It's in the Old Testament, of course. They're taken out of Egypt, led by Moses, through the wilderness for 40 years, trying to get Egypt out of them and get them ready to go into the promised land, into the land that God was going to give them, which was Abraham's land. It was the land that God had promised, right? The promised land. And so they're God's covenant people. Now that's what happens to them in the wilderness. Because remember, they've been slaves before. They were slaves in Egypt. They had no identity. No identity. So when they got into the wilderness, God was in the process of making them a people, a covenant people belonging to him. That's why he gave them the law, the 10 Commandments, and the rest of the law. The fact that they were to have a Sabbath, that they were to have feast days, that they were to celebrate, that they were to constantly look to God. He even told them to build a tabernacle, didn't he? And to have that tabernacle be right in the center of everything, the center of where they camped, center of their government, center of their worship. God was to be the center. God was to be in their midst. And God showed himself by coming down in a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud in the daytime. He was there. He was there with them. And they began to look to him. Now, of course, it took 40 years for that all to happen. And then you remember they went into the land, finally, under the leadership of Joshua. And then, of course, we have the judges, and then we go to Samuel. Samuel was a judge, but he was also a prophet and a priest. And then, of course, they wanted kings, and so then we had Saul and David and Solomon, and then went on to the other kings. And then, at the time after Solomon, the land of Israel, which up to that point had been pretty well united, under David it was, split. And there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, okay? And then, of course, during all that time, we have a bunch of bad kings and a few good ones down in Judea here along the way. But then we had the prophets. We had Elijah and Elisha, and then all the other prophets that came along, Isaiah and Jeremiah, and then all the minor prophets, and they're all speaking God's word to the people, aren't they? And during that time, they are continually becoming more and more worldly. And they're beginning to leave God. And they're becoming rebellious. And eventually, God takes them captive again, in a sense, by taking them back into the world. Assyria is a big country way up north, and they come down and take the northern kingdom. And they take many of those people, those Israelites, into captivity. They take the cream of the crop, like Daniel, and they take them up into that country, and they try to make Assyrians out of them. And then the Babylonians come along, and they try to make Babylonians out of them. And so that goes on. Then they have the Persians, and then Greece, and then Rome. And by this time, Israel is just kind of lost, because the people are scattered. Now, a lot of them are still there. A lot of them still remain in Israel during this time. But a lot of the best ones kind of go into these other lands. And, when we studied Esther, they were in Persia, weren't they? And a lot of them stayed in Persia up until the 20th century. Iran, which today, of course, is the old Persia, had a tremendously large group of Jews when Israel became a nation. And they had to flee for their lives. They fled. Most of them came back to Israel. Okay, well, then what happened? Then, of course, finally, under the Roman Empire, now this is, of course, when Jesus came on the scene, but under the Roman Empire, then we have the place in 70 AD where Jerusalem falls. And when Jerusalem fell and the temple was destroyed, the people were scattered, totally scattered. It's what we call the diaspora or the dispersion. The dispersion of the Jews just all over the world. When you look back, say back into the 18th, 19th, 20th century, there were Jews everywhere. There were Jews in China, there were Jews in Australia, there were Jews in Canada, there were Jews all over Europe, there were Jews all over the world. South America, a whole lot of Jews went to South America. But they always were Jews. They were always Jews. And I think that is what is so amazing. Even though they were scattered, they remained a people of God. Now, many of them did not really worship God. Many of them were not faithful, Torah keepers or anything like that, but they knew they were Jews. They knew they were Jews. There were certain, rituals that they did, like Sabbath, or lighting the candles on Friday evening, or maybe even having Passover. They didn't really know what they were doing, but it was kind of the tradition. I mean, this is what we always do, this is what we do. And but they knew that they were different. They were different. They had customs. And many of them, of course, kept their faith. They had certain customs, they had certain beliefs. They did not marry outside their tribes for the most part. They intermarried. Now that in itself, when you have intermarriage constantly within a group of people, that can cause some problems genetically, which there are certain illnesses today that are more prevalent among the Jewish people. And they're beginning to understand that, detect that. And even to this day, they are beginning to discover there is a certain DNA that Jewish people have. So, are they a race? Are they a religion? It's difficult to really say, because There are black Jews, there are Jews that are in India that call them, that are of a Jewish tribe, you know, and yet they look really like Indian people. You know, what is it? They are people, aren't they? They're just a people. They are a covenant people. They kept the Sabbath. They had their feast days. They kept the dietary laws. And they became a people. And for that reason, they were always distinguished. You know, there was always the Jews. And for the most part, throughout all of history, they have been hated. They have been hated. And it's because they carry the DNA of God. It's because I believe that on the stamp of their very being is the fact that they are God's covenant people. And it's a battle, I've told you this before, it's a battle between God and Satan. Satan hates them because they carry that DNA. They're the children of promise. Just like he hates us. Let's not forget that, you know, if we're believers, he hates us. We've got an enemy. His name is Satan. And, you know, we, praise God, know how to overcome him. But we have to understand that. Now we're going to have some table talk this morning because I want you to talk about what distinguishes Christians today. Are we a people distinctive? Are we different? Do we have influence in the world? Is our belief and behaviors cause us to be set apart so that the world knows that they have a people to be reckoned with? I don't know. Let's talk about that, okay?